Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Human Factors Cast. This is episode 314. Can you believe we've done that many of these? We're recording this episode live on February 5th, 2026. I'm your host, Nick Roome, and I'm joined today by Mr. Barry Kirby.
Hello there. How are we doing?
Doing all right, Barry. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Love to be here as always.
Me too. I've turned off the pre-show apathy and have turned on the show persona. We're here. We
Yes.
have an awesome show lined up for you all. Let's talk about the title. I'm begrudgingly accepted that we must talk about AI this week, as much as we try to avoid it, as much as we try to get you interesting stories that do not involve AI and human factors. Well, sometimes it's just unavoidable. So we'll be previewing a few different stories about what the latest in AI is. But first, we got some programming notes. In fact, if you're unfamiliar, we have a lab. We have a lab here at the Human Factors Cast. It's the Human Factors Cast Digital Media Lab. Rolls right off the tongue. And we have some fabulous folks in that lab. And what those fabulous folks are working on sometimes see the light of day. Sometimes it's the unseen, unsung, appreciation for behind the scenes tasking that happens there too. But we have something new for you all that is a brand new take on human factors and its crossover with games. And so it is called User Experience Points. This is a very clever title. We're very proud of it. And, the first episode is out now. So if you follow us on any of the social platforms that have short form video, you can find it there: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. It's a great reel. It's a great time. And we're going to be posting more of those. We're heavily into development already. And it's been doing some numbers on the Instagrams. It's, I think, what, 20 something thousand views, which is not insignificant for a niche like human factors. So very cool. Great job, lab. Aside from that, Barry, what's the latest over at 1202?
1202, we actually have some live episodes, or should I say a live episode? So the first episode since 2024 is now live out there. So Matt Odell from Mill UX shared his thoughts with me on how UX and HF can be better used and better recognized in the defense domain. And really, we spent a lot of time talking about how do we better appreciate the value that it brings to defense products. But we also went back to that the old argument, the old discussion around what is that relationship between HF and UX, and Matt comes from this as a comparatively newer into the domain, so he's ex-military and then picked this up on a project and has since become almost a evangelical about it in terms of using UX and Kanban and them sort of approaches. So we had a really good chat around that. So that is out there. I've also recorded the second episode, so I'm not going to share who it's with yet, but it's somebody who's quite important, and that's going to be going live in a couple of weeks. And then just a reminder that if you've been using our website to access 1202, then obviously we had the slight hiccup with the old 1202 podcast domain. So it's now 1202pod.com. So see you there.
As long as we're talking about new stuff, we have so many new stuff for you this week. We got the user experience points, we got the new stuff over at 1202, and local to the show, we have a new segment for y'all tonight. So I'm very excited for y'all to see the new segment that the Aerospace Systems Technical Group from HFES has been cooking up for us. So that'll be a little bit later in the show, but why don't we go ahead and get into the news? That's right. This is the part of the show all about human factors news. Barry, what are our stories this where let's start with one story. What is our story? Top story. What is the first story this week? Just read
Okay.
a story. Go.
As you
Stop
say,
me.
I have three stories this week. So the first one, as we're going to look at, is what happens when novelty and it starts quietly rewiring how we think, how we work, and how we play. Our first story tackles AI slop and how it may actually be training us to act more like Wikipedia editors. So we are now more into double checking sources and treating everything like we see online with default skepticism instead of blind trust. So, Nick, have you been finding that? Do you check your sources more? Do you believe what you read?
Um, I mean, it's Well, let me talk about it from this perspective. I think this this claim here is kind of optimistic at best. I tend to think about like the folks on Facebook, the Facebook moms that are like, oh my gosh, can you? How did they train those cats to dance? Um, I tend to think about those people as the average, where there are people like us who are heavily invested in the advancements in AI and the advancements in tech, and I think that we are certainly changing our behaviors. Um, and I think that there's also just an interesting note that if we do sort of default to this skepticism of what we're seeing, I think that can tend to breed conspiracy theories, which is
Yeah.
incredibly dangerous. And so those are my two like initial thoughts, but we can talk about it more in detail. What were your thoughts as you were reading through this article?
So I guess in some ways similar to yourself, that it's easy to see some of this data coming out and thinking, yes, people are reading deeper into it, and that type of thing. But as you point out, is this just our bubble? We're seeing our own stuff on social media, so we believe what we see, and therefore, if we see more people doing this sort of thing, we think we can transcribe that to the whole population. It's not quite true. Um, I think also though there is still some elements within the technology that means that, for those of you, when we are reading it, it's very analogous to what to simulation and what we see in simulation, because there is this term uncanny valley in simulation where something is simulated well, but it's just not quite right. So there, it isn't perfectly simulated. So you in your brain can know. Um, it looks good, but it's not. But it's and it look wait high quality and all that sort of stuff, but it's just not moving in the right way. The creature or the person is not moving. But we push ourselves because we're like, okay, I know it's not real, but I'll believe it anyway in order for the simulation, for the gaming, for whatever it is that I'm doing. And I think that's the way AI is now. That you can see a lot of AI content, AI generated content through LLMs or whatever, and for those of us who read quite a lot of it, we can see it. We know it's AI generated because of the construction, and because of what is put together. The video is just that, either a little bit too perfect or a little bit too polished. Um, but but as I've said, because that's in our bubble, the general public is possibly not quite there, and we're still in that piece of believing what we see. Um, is the It's still got a fair way to go before we everybody is as critical as they need to be. But it is this idea about be critically reviewing our sources is a key skill we're going to need in the future. Um, it's easy. I sort of make the analogy with newspapers of old. We sort of talk about this idea about lies in the press, or nuances in the press that lean left or right or whatever, like it's a brand new thing. It's not. It's always been in the press, but we've had it through discrete channels before, and you've known where a certain newspaper, what its leanings are. Whereas now you don't have them big flags up there. So yeah, it's going to be a key skill. I do think it is becoming more, and the data seems to be backing that up. But it's not everybody, as you quite rightly say.
Yeah, I think there's also some things going on here when it comes to AI slop, especially when it comes to the assumption. I think there's an assumption by the author of this one, particularly, that is thinking that people are ramping up their literacy. when, I kind of see the opposite. People are disengaging, or they're sort of retreating into their echo chambers. Um, and so I question the core hypothesis around this article. They do cite some data that would support their claim, right? So I'll just read some of these supporting data points here. There's 21% of videos shown to new YouTube users are classified as low quality AI slop. So that's kind of the baseline for what normal content looks like for a new account. You also have another citation here for the trust in national news dropping 76% in 2016 to 56% in 2025. That's a 20% reduction. And I think y- they make the claim that there's this sort of this might be fake by default. thing happening, but I don't know if that's necessarily true, especially when you, you know the contrary is true too. AI video generation is getting better and better, and it's harder for us to discern that uncanny valley of what is fake and what is real. The tells are getting harder and harder to parse apart. There have been videos that I've seen that I've said like please be AI because they're so disturbing or something, you know, that it's like, hey, that's got to be AI, right? Or it's somebody that's deeply disturbed doing these things. Um, so I don't know. I tend to err on the side of this one is uh, I see it, but I don't.
Yeah. I think the one statistic in this that I think is really interesting from a humanity perspective is the 70% of adults, young adults, get news incidentally. So they are coming across news. They are not going out to try and find news. Where historically you've gone by the newspaper, you go and look and work out what's going on in the world today. We now have to put it in front of people more rather than them coming to grab it and consume it. The other bit in this article I quite liked is, which I hadn't really heard of much about before, is this C2PA, which is a tech solution for cryptographic signing. So to prove that a file is to prove that it's real, so it's real content. It's there now. It's only really viable for a handful of devices. This article says. So unless you make it universally available, which could then, how does it not then get abused? Um,
Yeah.
but the idea of being able to sign, this content today is we are two still live people doing our thing
As
across
far
the
as we
Atlantic.
know.
Um, One day we sort of joked about it before, isn't it? Where we've said, can we have two AI versions of ourselves doing a podcast on our behalf? That's not today. We are still here. We're still human, but we would need at some point. We're probably going to need to digitally sign in some way to say yes, we are real. Um, so I quite like that. That was a good insight.
Do I need to add like a ticker at the bottom that says we are real people talking about AI?
Yes. Yeah, because it's a reverse one, and then because then we'll have the AI versions of ourselves talking about the real people.
Right. Okay, why don't we move on to the next story here?
Yeah, okay. So the next story, we're digging into MIT technology reviews. Look at the augmented workplace, where AI shows up as a general purpose technology that raises productivity by amplifying human work rather than replacing whole jobs, especially in under automated sectors like healthcare, education, finance. I'll probably chuck research in there as well. So yeah, do you see have your AI buddy alongside you, helping you in your day to day rather than taking over your entire job?
In my notes, I put the human AI robot teaming technical group exists for this very reason. I think there's a large consensus within our field um, that it's going to be a teaming approach. That AI is not to be seen as a tool, but rather as a uh, collaborative partner in various circumstances. And I think the more that we think about that, um, as you know, this AI thing is a partner. This AI thing, AI as a partner, especially agents or even LLMs. I think there's a different mindset that comes to that approach than thinking about them as tools. And so I think this article is kind of getting at that, and it'll be interesting to dig into this a little bit deeper and what does that actually mean for the workplaces. But what are your initial thoughts on this one, Barry?
So for me, I mean, this is Moore's law writ large. So the idea of technology evolving and developing at a rapid pace. Um, AI, we spoke about it in almost reverential terms. I remember we started studying it in 97, 98 at university. And it was a real tight thing that you had to be, super into software and all that sort of stuff to develop this stuff. But now it's so embedded in what we're doing. It is rapidly changing the way we work, or it should be rapidly changing the way we work because of what it's doing. So you're right. It's going to be working alongside us, but there are them direct tools. We've talked about things like vibe coding, that changing the way software engineers work, the companions. So what this story largely links into, with this idea of supporting what you're doing, it being alongside to nudge you and give you information to your fingertips. But it's even there in indirect support. So a lot of your web searches and that now are supported by large language models to make that searching easier. So now, if you're into Google or any of the other things, you're now getting the AI précis at the top. So that's sort of that's giving you the summary of your research, so you don't even have to scroll through your things anymore. I think for me, the big step that is really happening now is the gatekeepers have changed. So really, up to this point, I would say up to the past few years, the specialists who can use this technology, who can define this technology, who can code in this technology, have been the gatekeepers to the technology. Um, and that's in the same way as that the um, data itself was gate kept by librarians and all that, all them and companies and large organizations until the internet came along and made data so available to the point now we treat it almost like a currency. So um, that the internet itself heralded that data revolution, and now we AI is clearly the next revolution, that's going to enable so many things. I think there's a lot of people out there, and some people I really respect on the likes of LinkedIn and places like that, who are still trying to put the AI cat back in the bag. They're trying to sort of close Pandora's box, and I just don't that it's just not an option anymore. So as you've alluded to, there's for the HF domain itself, there's three main streams I see that we need to get good in. It's not an option. It has got to be part of our everyday work, and that's understanding trust, and where data is coming from, understanding teaming, and task allocation. That derivation between automation, autonomy, and human work, they're going to be three key pillars of work for us going forward. So yeah, I'm quite excited by this. Having worked on projects, I think probably about 8 years ago, which I've mentioned on here before about using. So there was an avatar made of myself to do a representation of me and to look to see whether we could, if a chatbot version of me was as good as the real me. Now this seems like it's just a thing. It's there.
Yeah, one thing that's particularly striking to me about this article, MIT Tech Review is an outlet for people who love nerdy stuff, and which is why we find a lot of our human factors stories in there. And the interesting thing to me about this particular one is that this is in partnership with Vanguard. Vanguard is not small by any means, and the thing that's striking to me particularly about this is that we, as human factors practitioners, we've known this for a while, right? We've known the teaming approach, we've known the um, the domain as far as it approaches things like decision making, and overloading uh, cognitive tasking, and those types of things. But the interesting thing to me about this is that now you have these big companies kind of stepping in and saying, maybe we should shift away from replacing jobs to or automating jobs to working alongside this thing. And
Mhm.
so that to me is a distinct difference or a distinct marker that if you can get big businesses to approach this perspective, then our job becomes easier to justify and easier to promote and easier to talk about, because now we're understanding it as a universal need rather than thinking about it as we gotta replace these humans with these agents or something, versus okay, we got to get these humans aligned with these agents. It's a very different problem, a very different mindset, very different space. So that's very interesting to me, and I'm happy to see it, and I'm I'm genuinely thrilled for our folks in the human factors field who are going to have a ton of work to do in this space.
I mean, I guess the one quote out of this that I think is absolutely spot on. So part of this framework, this review has allowed them to examine AI automation risks over 800 different op, occupations, which is fabulous. So they've done a really broad review of this. Um, and fundamentally, they reckon they think that upwards of 20% of occupations could be at risk. That's which is actually a lot smaller than number than what we talked about in the past. But what they say, and quoting from the article, is workers' time will increasingly shift to higher value and uniquely human tasks, which for me is all around making decision making, moralistic decision making, value decision making. But unique human thing is to make decisions. Yes, AI helps us with the data behind that and things like that. So I'm really pleased to see that in articles like this, we're now really talking about what are the uniquely human traits that AI just will not be able to do or shouldn't do. Where is that human in the box? So, as you say, it's not just about replacing, which I think is fab.
One thing I think generally that businesses should be cautious of as they go into this approach is, you're right, there's going to be these distinctly human tasks, but there are also other things here at stake that the people who are changing their mindset need to consider, especially when it comes to thinking about their employees as like co-designers of the workflows or the processes that have to happen as you interact with this agent. They can't be prescriptive about it. They need to include folks in on this process so that way when it is applied, it's not applied in a way that is going to be clunky or where sort of it's tacked on. And I think that's the difference between thinking about it as a tool and thinking about it as a partner, where if it's a partner, it has to be more integrated into the workflow of the worker, regardless of the industry, right? It has to be integrated into that workflow. Whereas if you had sort of that prescriptive approach, you must use AI to do X, Y, and Z. I feel like that partnership breaks a little bit. And so that's something that I'm concerned about looking at it from a human factors perspective, is to make sure that leadership or higher ups understand that it needs to be, um, it needs to be thought of as a collaborative approach for how to move forward with these rather than a prescriptive one.
Yeah, and I guess there's one of the challenges there is what type of AI do you then start developing? Because you think that if you're going to have a cooperative AI agent, something to help you do your job, then that's going to be, as we have now, the AIs are generally developed quite specifically to do specific tasks or specific bouts of knowledge. Um, Whereas artificial general intelligence is the thing that's coming up. And is it easier then for us just to produce AGI agents that will support any job? And then does that allow is that then going to support the user? So on the one hand, it will answer any questions or support us in any task that we need to do from the specific job to help him make a coffee or something like that, or working out if a shop's open. Um, does that mean that then the AI agents can overstep boundaries of the jobs and things like that? So how is it cheaper to buy a bunch of the same AGI and just deploy that no matter what they're on the workspace? And therefore, how do you delineate between them? Um, and then I do keep on going back to, and we've quoted this on the show before, was the quote from Professor Paul Salmon, who when he was talking about AGIs, and as they become more intelligent, the more that they know, how do we still monitor that knowledge base and understand where that is in overall intelligence, I guess, because what does the future hold there? That is still I having been quite positive around this. I think it is the future, but where we still need to be cognizant of those risks within the workspace.
You bring up an interesting point that I don't know if we've talked about before, but essentially this boils down to, if you think about the difference between a targeted model that is meant specifically for a specific task, and you work on integrating that as a partner in the domain versus applying something like a general artificial intelligence, there's an interesting gap that happens. I feel like the companies that are going to be able to afford the highly specific tailored models are going to far outperform the ones that have a general intelligence applied to many different things. And likewise, I feel that there's also going to be an even bigger gap from the companies that choose to use AI as a strategy versus those who don't. And so you'll get sort of this even wider gap between the companies who don't choose to incorporate AI into their employees' workflows, all the way up to the companies that are using very targeted models for very targeted tasks in their domains, right? I'm thinking about like healthcare, for example. You have very targeted models that are looking at, um, radiology images or something like that,
Yeah.
right? That's a very targeted model. You don't want general intelligence looking at that stuff, um, because the healthcare companies that do the general intelligence versus the targeted model, there's going to be a wide difference in who is able to look at early screenings for things like cancer, right? So that's just one example of that gap. Um,
So,
and yeah,
sorry, I guess just to jump in, I guess the only reason that the gap is going to exist is because of processing power and an economy. Because the that targeted piece within the overall AGI gap, it just means that there's a lot of if they do incorporate it there, that means there's a lot of fat on that model that's not going to get used and exercised. So if you can afford to run it, both power wise and however that mechanism works, then maybe then again the large companies will be able to afford to do it. And I do think there's an interesting piece now. I think the particularly for small companies, micro companies, small companies, medium sized companies, that if they get on the AI bandwagon now, they will be still they can still be on that crest of getting the AI advantage. So if you're into developing, you want to develop tools and stuff like that now, there's still leverage to be had by adopting an AI strategy and making that work. We're going to get to to a tipping point, I think, pretty soon, where if you're not using AI as part of your business, you're going to be left behind. And that differentiator. I think we are still on the um, the growth side of it, but only just. If you're even a small, so maybe an electrician or something like that, so maybe somebody who isn't into software, into that type of thing, but still has a lot of use for AI to help streamline their business flows. If they're not using it soon, then they're going to get left behind by other people who do adopt. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this narrative shifts from the could have and it's a great thing to do to must have, and if you don't, you're going to fall by the wayside.
yeah, and I think ultimately it comes down to leadership's attitudes on how to implement it, right? If they think about it as a tool and are prescriptive about it versus if they use specialized models versus if they just brute force it, that all that stuff will impact how it's adopted within a company. I'm just happy to see that a big company is waving the flag on this. That's my takeaway.
I guess the other bit that I would say as well is that this is we are at this point now where we probably don't know where AI is truly going to go, because it's now got to the point where the curious can use it. So it's the likes of you and I sitting there going, "Oh, what if I could do this with it?" And what I could, I've had this idea. Could I just do this? Could I link this to this, this agent to this agent, and do that? And some people will come up with some quite wacky ideas, or what we consider wacky, and then just prove things that nobody was expecting. It was on nobody's route map or anything like that. And then we'll end up using them on a day-to-day basis. I mean, could we say that 5, 10 years ago that we'd be using AI so much, say even just within this podcast, the amount of tools and things that we've got in place to make this a better production, so we can focus on the delivery rather than having to do what would take you hours and hours and hours of prep beforehand. We wouldn't have predicted that years ago because it would have been seen as a frivolous use of this type of thing.
Mhm.
Whereas now it's a core thing of what we're doing. So yeah, no, I think this idea, this is almost the Pandora's box moment where people are are going to be using it for doing random things that we can't even think about, and then it will become a de facto standard in very rapidly.
Open the box. All right. Why don't we get into the last story we have up tonight?
Yeah, so we're going to go with Google. So we play with Google's DeepMind's Project Genie, a showcase for the Genie 3 world model that lets you sketch or prompt your own tiny interactive worlds. So, Nick, have you been into your, is it 60-second version of this yet? Have you handed over the big dollars to make this a thing?
Oh no, not yet. No, it's insanely cost prohibitive. I'll start with that. But I think the more interesting thing about this particular, so if you're unfamiliar, what it does is it basically it generates an entire environment, and responds to your controls within that environment, right? So you can like think about like a video game, but a procedurally generated video game that only it generates every frame as it responds to your input. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. And I think this is an interesting application outside of gaming, right? There's a lot of there's a lot of talk in the gaming spheres about like, oh, this is gonna cause developers to lose all their money, or I don't know. But I think there's a more interesting narrative here that that maybe hasn't been talked about, and that's sort of the shift towards things like micro simulations. So now you might be able to simulate how a a new tool in an environment might perform, or how a setup at a desk might impact somebody's workflow as they're doing a certain task, and it can be modeled live on the fly with something like this. And so I find that approach fascinating. I also find the applications to video games fascinating too. You can put whatever world you want in there and then make your own game. I think there's a lot more that goes into game development that will make this not a non-issue for quite some time. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on this thing?
I guess in some ways I'm not quite as excited about this as I think I should be. It's really got interesting potential. Clearly, it's you watch the video, and I recommend everybody to go and have a look at have a look at the video because it's high quality. It's got the way that they describe it is quite cool, but it's a bit Google Glass. They produce something. It looks cool, but what's it for really? What is the intended use case? Um, I mean, my first thought was actually, what is this just Minecraft in high def? But it just doesn't have the rest of it. Or is it Second Life? Because if those who remember Second Life as the next big thing, without friends, but with a massive bill, because as we've alluded to, it's um, you have to have their $250 a month AI Ultra plan to engage with it at the moment. That'll come down. I'm this is clearly as with the done with Google Glass. It's an experimental thing. It's to throw it out there and just see kind of what happens. So that bill will come down in time. And I'm assuming that time limited factor is just for performance. They can't be throwing that much what is clearly high end processing to everybody just because the mini expense. I guess the use cases you've already touched on a couple. I see, okay, mini test rigs is there. I sort of had the idea. So when you look at digital twins, could you see and you weren't sure about how something was going to um, working gravity, or maybe not, maybe zero gravity or something like that, understand the mechanic or a movement of something when you do an assessment for usability or something like that. I think there's I can see different use cases in the same way that with Google Glass I could see when wearing them, when using them, oh, I could use it for this, I could use it for this. Surgeons are there good, oh, we could use it for this. But but I think it's got to allow people have got to be able to play with it and then see what they do. For then Google will do what they did last with Google Glass and go, okay, now we'll take it back in, and we'll go down this route with it. So, um, yeah, unlike the other two bits, it is a new pack because obviously it is prompt engineered, and so they're really leaning into that quite a lot. So that is cool. It's a great application of it. I can't quite get as excited by it as the other bits.
You bring up a good point about killed by Google, right? And I think this is actually a direct result of something that was killed by Google. I was a big fan of Stadia when it was a thing. And one of the things that they were working on with Stadia was, if you don't remember, Stadia was a cloud gaming platform by Google. And one of the things that they were working on in the early development of that was doing predictive frames based on predicted input from what you thought, or from what the system thought your next input would be. So it was generating different frames behind the scenes. I Probably similar to how this works, to where if you were to hit left on the controller, it would generate, these things, and then the system would catch up with it. And so that was an attempt to reduce the lag that people would experience on these cloud gaming platforms. So I think this is probably a lot of that research being realized now, in terms of being able to produce not only frames ahead, but an entire model of a world at a prompt level. And I tend to share your sentiment about enthusiasm for Google made products when there's not maybe some super strong use cases for it. But if you think about things like Google Glass, they're coming out with the
Mm,
glasses later this year, right? And so all the early research that they did on Google Glass paved the way for them to do something like that. And even if, and Stadia again killed by Google, but paved the way for stuff like this, I'm pretty sure. And then, if this thing does get killed, what's the next thing that's going to use it?
yeah.
Um, so I see a lot of value in this, and I already kind of mentioned the simulation side of things. I think that's a huge benefit to this technology, outside of the gaming application, right? Because you can imagine whatever world, but if you can imagine a real world, and if it moved with similar physics, or interacted with physics in a realistic way, you could take a picture of an environment, or throw in a modeled environment, and have humans interact with it in a way, in a digital environment, in ways that they would be anticipated to do so in real life. And so, to me, the simulation piece is big. um I don't know, I am excited about this, so I will be excited for both of us.
Right. Okay. No, I mean, you're right. I mean, this is why I don't mention the Google Glass in a Google Glass journey in a derogatory way. I think a lot of people do, is because you're right. They've developed a way of basically bringing in people paying to be beta testers. And it's so that's they've got their beta model. They'll sell it. We'll engage with it, give them the feedback, and then they'll take that away and go do something else. And I think this will be there. I think I do like the idea. The more that we've discussed about it around that digital twin world, because I've done and still doing using um, human digital modeling to try different things, but it's always it's an event. I have to go to a special room, wear special gear. If you could use something like this on your desktop, or just putting on just a standard headset, um so that doesn't need like loads and loads of rendering, loads and loads of messing about, it's done for you. That's fantastic, and especially with industry 5.0 coming along. So this idea of of the more human focused in industry development and production, this could have a really big impact into that. So yeah, I guess I'll take back. I'm not as excited, or I'm not excited about it. I'm perhaps just not as excited. So I'm a bit excited.
Okay, all right, I'll take a bit excited. I think the one thing that I'll kind of end on with this is, just imagine the domains that this could be applicable in.
Mm.
I saw a presentation years ago on sort of a simulated environment for being able to conduct triage in a battlefield scenario. And so, taking things like healthcare, um, or even defense, or heck, you could do you could even do education for something like this. Imagine, building a simulated environment of a solar system or something for a child, right? Like, and having them interact with that. Like, my son's really into space right now. he would love to be able to explore space, with his own character, using a model like this. And I think of how great that would be for things like education. And um, I think that's cool. But be cool to see it in all these other areas too.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank our friends over at Engadget and MIT Tech Review and the UX Collective for our news stories this week. We post all the links to the original articles in our Discord, where you can join us for more discussion on these stories and much more. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to see what's going on in aerospace. We'll be back right after this. Yes, huge thank you as always to our patrons. I see you. I hear you. You are supporting us in more ways than you can possibly imagine, because you are also supporting the lab, who does some fantastic things. And you support all the tools that we use, the web hosting domains. There's a ton of stuff that goes into running a podcast and a lab, if you could believe it. So thank you genuinely for all your support. And if you have the financial means to do so, we would love your support as well. I don't really have a good segue for this, but we're gonna get into a new segment for the show. I'm very excited about this. This new segment is called This Week in Aerospace. And this is brought to you by our friends over at the HFES Aerospace Systems Technical Group. So, Elena, Phil, over to you. What's the latest in aerospace?
Well, thanks, Nick and Barry. This is Elena Zhang, joined by Phil Doyle for the Aerospace TG at HFES. We're joining the show to share the latest news in aerospace.
So just before the holidays, the U.S. Department of Transportation unveiled the first Advanced Air Mobility Roadmap, or AAM, to accelerate aerospace transformation. That's a major turning point for air traffic management, and it sends a strong signal that the U.S. wants to leverage advanced air mobility in the near future. But first, what is AAM? Can you give us a brief explanation?
Yeah, so AAM refers to a new transportation ecosystem of small, low-altitude aircraft, advanced air traffic management, and supporting infrastructure that aims to move people and cargo around more efficiently. It includes electric vertical takeoff and landing, also known as eVTOL aircraft, efficient propulsion systems, and technologies that enable safe, scalable, low-altitude operations. Industry leaders are progressing towards initial AAM operations later this decade. To name a few, Archer Aviation is working with U.S. cities on early trial flights under a federal pilot program, and is positioned as official air taxi partner for the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. Joby Aviation has already delivered test aircraft and is preparing for early commercial air taxi services, with some international activity expected as soon as 2026. Beta Technology has completed fuel-efficient passenger flight tests in New York, with potential commercial services starting around 2026 to 2027. And Whisk Aero is developing what will be the first FAA-certified autonomous passenger aircraft.
All right, so Elena, you mentioned a few development, but are they already taking place in the US?
So actually, in the US, most eVTOL aircraft are still in the flight testing and certification phase, and that's because FAA certification process is very rigorous. Full commercial services will take time. As a result, several companies are advancing early development abroad, where regulatory frameworks and infrastructures are advancing faster. For example, Joby Aviation has delivered aircraft to Dubai, and Archer Aviation is testing its eVTOL aircraft called Midnight in Saudi Arabia. Other companies are also conducting test flights and demonstrations to build early potential experience outside of US while continuing to pursue FAA certification. So back to the US roadmap. How did AAM roadmap come to be?
All right, so this roadmap is the outcome of nearly 3 years of work, following a congressional mandate that was allocated to the Department of Transport to convene an interagency working group to define what they call a national strategy for the coming decade. So the working group brought together over 100 experts from 25 federal agencies, and the roadmap represents their consolidated view of this effort. Now, the AAM roadmap actually consists of two documents. There's the strategy and the plan. The strategy sets the larger policy visions of the United States, and it formulates 40 recommendations. The plan details how federal agencies will execute those recommendations over time. It's essentially a list of action items related to each recommendation and the agency responsible for executing them. Both documents are well worth reading for anyone interested in anticipating how the national airspace system may evolve over the next several years.
So, in your opinion, from a human factors perspective, what should we pay attention to?
So what really stood out to me reading the roadmap is how it frames the problem space. The strategy organized AAM integration around 6 pillars: airspace, infrastructure, security, community planning, workforce, and automation. We can start with airspace because that's a major one. So currently, airspace is managed by air traffic controllers that authorize what each aircraft can do. So ATC authorizes you to climb, descend, or move laterally. The roadmap suggests that airspace management will evolve toward what they call cooperative areas. The idea is that third-party service providers would manage defined portion of the airspace. That would still happen under the FAA rules and oversight, but it will no longer rely entirely on ATCs. So that's a big change.
Yeah, so from my perspective, the infrastructure pillar sounded like a call for action to modernize how we fly. The roadmap explicitly calls for new surveillance solutions for low altitude, high density operations and for communication protocols that move beyond traditional voice radio. With the number of vehicles expected to fly, airspace needs to move toward data link communication to manage authorizations and clearances more effectively because those can be handled by software. There's also strong emphasis on adapting existing infrastructure and regulations to accommodate new AAM entrants rather than forcing them into a framework that was designed decades ago. The roadmap points out that the current airport guidance was never written with remotely piloted, supervised, or autonomous aircraft in mind. Defining new facility and equipment requirements will be very critical here.
Yeah. Another big challenge would be workforce, as we are already facing pilot shortage in commercial aviation. And AAM will be competing for the same pool of workers and will also create new job categories that don't exist yet.
Right. Previous U.S. workforce studies identified dozens of new jobs across design, operations, and support roles. And schools and universities need to develop new education and training programs to prepare for those jobs.
And finally, there is automation. The roadmap acknowledged the arrival of highly automated vehicles in the airspace, like Whisk that Elena mentioned before, that is autonomous and remotely monitored. But we still need more information to know how to design and how to certify such highly automated aircraft. So the roadmap tasked the FAA and NASA to research on human-machine interaction and role allocation in highly automated and autonomous aviation systems, including performance during off-nominal and degraded condition. So we know that currently NASA and the FAA are already working with the industry and academics via what they call the RAM-AO working group. And so that stands for Routine Autonomous Multi-Aircraft Operations. And I'm really excited to learn about their results.
Yeah. The AAM roadmap has been well received by the industry, with news reporting saying the major eVTOL players applauded the US government for taking a strong position on AAM in the country. And we're very excited to see how it will pan out in the future. So that's all we have for this week. Thank you for listening. Back to you, Nick.
Wow, that was great. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Elena. That's awesome. I love this. This is what a great segment.
Yeah, we're clearly out of a job. We're done.
Yeah, you can start next week. No, thank you. This is amazing. Thank you so much to our friends over at the Aerospace Systems Technical Group for putting that together. Elena, Phil, thank you so much for breaking down the latest in aerospace systems. If you like that segment and want more, you can reach out to us. You can reach out to the technical group and let them know that you saw it here and that you love it, and give them some positive feedback. All right, let's get into the last part of the show, I guess, that needs no introduction, but we'll just say it's one more thing. Barry, what is your one more thing this week?
Well, it's not my one more thing. It's actually my wife Amanda's one more thing, where she's this week got her certificate for her Masters of Science or her MSc in Human Factors Engineering. So I'm just now pleased that actually one of us in the company knows what they're doing. So no, I'm very proud of what she's achieved. She not only got her MSc, but she's done that whilst we've had obviously our children growing up and also running doing the day job at the same time. So to do all of that together, and she also reflected that on every assignment that she had, a child was either ill or issues at university or something like that. So there was never an element where she had an assignment that there wasn't some sort of family drama going on at the same time. So yes, no, and then her final project she did amazingly well on. So no, I'm really proud. So congratulations, Amanda.
Congratulations, Amanda. That's huge, and I feel like Amanda's part of the extended Human Factors cast family. Even though I don't talk with her regularly, I still feel connected to her, and so I'm very proud too.
I'll let her know
if it's worth anything.
So what about you, Nick? What's your one more thing?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I've had to keep this one under wraps for quite some time, because if I had discussed it, then it would indicate that I was playing it. And okay, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a great game. I'm going to start off with that. It's phenomenal. It's the story has stuck with me in ways that I can't describe unless you've played the thing. It's very cerebral in a lot of ways. There is so much to love about that game. And the reason I couldn't talk about it is because it was the first episode that we were going to do for user experience points, and it was specifically on the parry system. And I'm just gonna play this for you. So if you want to go and find us on any of the social media platforms that have short form content, I will give you a taste of what to expect for our series, User Experience Points.
Ready to parry. Parrying in Expedition 33 isn't about staring at the enemy like you're in an awkward conversation. The parry timing is locked to auditory hits using signal detection theory. This requires that players filter noise in order to detect signals. Your brain is constantly separating signal from noise. Sound cues cut through all the visual noise, like motion. As a result, the game is designed to lower the noise and amplifies the signals, allowing users to filter through stimuli to detect signals, also known as auditory cues. Parry timing is calibrated to auditory reaction time, not visual latency. That's why it feels demanding compared to other games. Games like Dark Souls or Final Fantasy VII Remake emphasize visual anticipation and motion cues. Expedition 33 leans auditory, which the designers leverage to shape the learning curve for players. This explains why dodging feels safer compared to parry. The game gives you more grace. But when you land that parry, man, it feels rewarding.
Yeah, there you go. That's a nice taste, although the visuals on that one were cropped quite weirdly here on the live stream. So apologies for that. But you can go see the full thing on our social media platforms. Like I said, it's a great game, and the lab did a great job with that. I'm incredibly proud of them. There's just a lot of pride here in the One More Thing this week. So congratulations, Amanda. Congratulations, the lab. And congratulations to you all for making it through the episode. That's it for today, everyone. If you like this episode, enjoy some of the discussion about AI and what it means for us as a society, I'll encourage you to go listen to one of our more recent episodes, episode 310, where we talk about how AI is reshaping human factors and UX roles, and how the 7 emerging jobs are coming out due to AI and decision making and all that stuff. So go listen to that. Comment wherever you're listening with what you think of the story this week. Do you love the new segment as much as we do or more? Let us know. For more in-depth discussion, you can always join us on our Discord community. You can visit our official website, sign up for our newsletter, stay up to date with all the latest Human Factors news. If you like what you hear, you want to support the show, there's a couple things that you can do. One, you can leave us a 5-star review. You can do that right now, actually. There's still a couple minutes left here this hour. Why don't you do it? Two, you could tell your friends about us. That helps us grow through word of mouth. And, people tend to take your recommendations a little bit more seriously than an algorithm. Or three, if you have the financial means to, why don't you consider supporting us on Patreon? You can help us support our lab and do wonderful things like what you just saw and heard for user experience points and amazing other things that we are working on too that I can't quite announce just yet. So there's a teaser for you. As always, links to all of our socials and our website are in the description of this episode. I want to thank Mr. Barry Kirby for being on the show today. Where can our listeners find you if they want to talk to you about AI?
If you want to come chat to me about AI, come and find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. Or if you want to come listen to me chat and interview people around AI and other human factors topics, find me on 1202 the Human Factors Podcast at 1202pod.com.
Excellent. As for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me on our Discord and across social media at Nick_Roome. If you're watching live, stay tuned for the post show. For the rest of you, thanks for tuning into Human Factors Cast. Until next time, it depends.